From the moment colonists stepped onto American soil, Native Americans have had to fight to maintain their rights and their land. From a genocide that wiped out 90% of their population, to bad land deals with colonists, it's difficult to describe just how many hardships they have faced throughout American history. Injustices that should have stopped hundreds of years ago continue today. In order to fully understand why Native Americans continue to face injustices, it's important to look at an essential part of their culture: water. The importance of water in Native American culture cannot be overstated. Professor Carletta Chief from the University of Arizona states, "Water is the lifeline of indigenous cultures, ceremonies, livelihood, and beliefs. However, the water rights of many Native cultures are under a constant threat. The protection of these water rights was prioritized during the 1900s, when industrial farming increased the water needs in urbanized areas and farms. This decreased the amount available for Native American reservations and brought forth a lot of change for indigenous people. After many years of unrest, the Winters Doctrine was established. This doctrine created standards for evaluating the rights of Native Americans. It had its origin in 1905, when the Montana government diverted water away from an already drought-reduced reservation. Immediately after, the U.S. Supreme Court sued Montana in order to protect whatever rights to water were held downstream by the people on the reservation. To support their standpoint, Judge Joseph McKenna referenced a deal made in 1888. This deal had promised to ensure the river would provide enough water to meet the needs of the reservation. Although this resolved some issues, the debate over water rights continued to escalate until 1908, at which point a new case arose: Winters versus the United States. This case once again occurred in Montana, with the same river and the same group of indigenous people being called into question. At this point, the Supreme Court took a different approach. Although they referenced the same 1888 agreement, the court made three things clear. First, Native American rights to water were not limited to amounts then needed or then in use. Second, the measure of the reserved right was whatever water was now needed or might be necessary in the future. Third, non-Indian settlers upstream of the reservation could not perfect a private right to water. These standards became known as the Winters Doctrine, a consequence of the Winters v. United States case. At the time, this was a huge step forward for Native Americans. However, the backlash after it had been established was severe. Hostile Westerners, indifferent reactions from the Department of Justice and the Department of Interior, and a politically weak Bureau of Indian Affairs made it hard to implement the doctrine. Little attention was paid at the time of the court's ruling, and for several decades thereafter, as the United States actively sought to open tribal lands to settlement and develop water resources for the benefit of non-Indians. This all changed in 1963, over 50 years after the doctrine was established. When a question about water rights arose in Colorado, the court relied heavily upon the precedents established by the doctrine. This case clarified Native American water rights, as well as making it a standard to uphold the Winters Doctrine. So is this doctrine still upheld today? Considering how it was made 100 years ago, one might think the water rights of Native people have been well established. However, this assumption simply isn't true. As climate change continues to jeopardize many areas in America, arid regions such as Idaho are particularly threatened. Climate change has reduced the amount of water in many local rivers, making it much harder to maintain the water rights of indigenous people. This dilemma reached its peak in the year 1999, when the Snake River Basin Injunction, an organization which controls water flow in Idaho, denied the existence of off-reservation water rights for the Nez Perce tribe. This decision, made by Judge Barry Wood, was the result of extreme misinterpretation. Based on previous treaties with the tribe, Wood declared the Winters Doctrine could only be applied within the borders of the reservation. Essentially, this meant that any malpractices upstream of the reservation were not deemed morally wrong. After the case had been established, it opened the door for over-irrigation and a decrease in the salmon population, a vital resource for Native people in the Northwest. Like many other decisions made by the Idaho government, it led to the reckless endangerment of indigenous people. One of the worst parts of this court decision is the origins of the judge himself. The judge came from a family of farmers. This meant he had a stake in the case. If his family could use more water, they could irrigate more plants and produce more product. Even after the Nez Perce tribe pointed out this inconsistency, the court upheld the decision. It is still upheld 20 years later. The ramifications of the Snake River case are quite harmful. This case implied the only water Native Americans are guaranteed is the water within their reservation. To say this is an injustice is an understatement. Climate change, pollution, and over-irrigation force Native Americans into a position of extreme stress. Additionally, it is concerning how few know about this decision. Native Americans are rarely portrayed in media, so this information often goes under the radar. In order to combat this, it becomes increasingly important to research these issues for yourself. Perhaps with a more educated group of people, we'll no longer exclude Native Americans from many of the resources we often enjoy.